My wife and I met during our student years and almost immediately realized that we were made for each other. It's not that we had a strong passion for each other, no, the point is different. We matched perfectly spiritually, so we decided that it didn't make any sense to look for someone else. My parents helped us get married and get a job, so as adults we took place quite early. Our family life was smooth and calm, but sometimes conflicts arose. As a rule, they were based on the fact that I did not take my wife to corporate parties and did not invite workmates to visit us. I didn't see anything critical in this and wasn't going to change my usual lifestyle, but for my wife it meant that I was supposedly shy and therefore hiding from everyone. But in this she was deeply mistaken. Although I trusted my friends, I had no desire to bring them closer to my family. I believed my wife, but after listening to conversations and reading thematic sites about relationships and infidelity, I was afraid to bring someone else home. It seemed to me that such people could jinx my ideal family and relationship with my spouse. That's why only parents and close relatives came to our house. Yes, it's once every couple of months. On New Year's holidays, I went to a corporate party again. My wife was very angry at me for not taking her with me. I tried to explain that there were only men there, but she wouldn't listen to anything. This time she broke up and resented me for a very long time. Throughout the event with the concert program, I thought about what happened at home. I even began to come to the conclusion that it was easier for me not to go anywhere at all than to see my wife's displeased face for a whole month afterwards. I came home sober and really hoped that it would please my wife. When I opened the doors of my apartment, I was very surprised by the deathly silence that stood there. And when I shouted to my wife, I realized that she was not at home. So I took out my phone and dialed her number. She didn't pick up the phone, but only dropped my call, writing a message that she also decided to go and have fun. I got angry and started calling more actively to demand that she return home immediately. Then the spouse turned off the phone altogether. He literally couldn't find a place for himself and didn't know where to look for his wife. When I called her parents, I didn't learn anything new, except that I also scared them very much. It was only 2 hours later that my wife came home and was very drunk. She didn't tell me where and with whom she was, but silently went to bed. I followed her, hoping to clarify the situation somehow. I lay down next to her and asked her to explain her behavior. My wife told me that from now on she will always do this when I go to corporate parties and other holidays alone. After these words, she fell asleep, leaving me alone with my thoughts. Of course, after a couple of days we reconciled and got on with our old lives, trying not to touch on controversial topics. I stopped going to corporate parties, trying not to provoke my wife into another scandal. She, in turn, apologized for her behavior that evening and said that she was sitting with her sister at the time. Nevertheless, her birthday was approaching, so I began to think of ways to surprise her. We had practically no friends, so I even began to think about inviting someone to visit us. After a little thought, my choice fell on a friend with whom I worked in the same shift. Since I didn't know much about his personal life, the first thing I decided to do was find out how he lived and whether he had a spouse. I sat down next to him during lunch and asked him to tell me if he had a spouse and how he met her. Dmitri, as if nothing had happened, told me his story, from which the idea of inviting him to my house disappeared overnight. He said that he took his common-law wife away from a colleague with whom he used to work together. I was very surprised and asked him to tell me in more detail. Dima drew attention to Elena from the very first visits to their work. She brought her lawful husband dinners and behaved very modestly. This behavior provoked Dmitri's hunting interest, so he began to show her minor signs of attention. As a hunter, he was waiting for the right moment to get rid of his lawful spouse and finally achieve his goal. A couple of hours later, he actually went to bed, leaving his wife alone with Dmitri. That's when he realized that he could act, and he didn't waste any time. Like a true gentleman, Dmitri began showering her with compliments, casually touching various parts of her slender body. The woman did not resist, but quickly sent her daughter to bed and returned to him. Their communication quickly shifted from friendly to more intimate, after which they attacked each other like animals. Everything happened sensually and very emotionally. Nevertheless, the husband and child did not hear anything. After receiving repeated pleasure, Elena saw Dmitri off and went to bed herself. The next day, the same colleague, Elena's husband, called him and asked for a meeting. The men met and beat each other up. His colleague could not forgive such betrayal, so he quit his job and moved to another city, having previously written a divorce petition. After this incident, he sent items, but personally did not want to have anything more to do with his wife and daughter. At that moment, Dmitri came to Elena again to comfort her after such a shock. Their communication ended again in the bedroom, however, as well as the subsequent times. So, 4 years later, they finally decided to move in together and have been living together ever since. Dmitri said all this as a winner who always gets his way. I listened to him and understood what a person who, like me, considered him a good friend might feel. After this conversation, I reduced communication with him to a minimum. On my wife's birthday, I gave her a gold necklace. It's better to let her sulk at me for being so unsociable than to go from me to someone like my colleague from work. A couple of days after her birthday, I decided to tell her about my initial plans for her holiday. She asked me why I hadn't acted as planned after all, to which I also told about the very story that Dmitri told me. She smiled and touched my face with her hand, gently stroking my stubble. My wife said that she would never do that, because she loves me very much. I hugged her and realized that all this time I was afraid of losing her. Now I realize that you need to trust your wives, and then everything will be fine and calm in the family. However, I still tried to keep no one close to my family.